Hey, what's the deal, YouTube? It's your girl, MizHoney. Welcome back to the channel, you guys. It is your girl, MizHoney, here with another review for Lovecraft Country. This is the flagship season 1. Today, we are going to be doing episode 7 entitled I Am. And it is all about Hippolyta. We will get to peek in on some of our other characters, but today we are unpacking Hippolyta and all that she encompasses as a woman, as a Black woman, as a mother, as a wife, as a scholar. Okay. And it is one of the more pivotal episodes in this season, because Hippolyta finally figures out the Orly. So without further ado, let us get into this episode. The episode opens 3 days earlier, and we see Hippolyta standing in the rubble of what used to be the castle, the mansion that George and Tick and Lettie stayed in when we first met the Shoggoths. She's standing in the rubble, the crumble of it all. We also get to see in this moment Hippolyta sort of flash back to right before they left for the museum. We all know that Lettie had a party at her home, and during that party, Hippolyta took the Orly from this party. And ever since then, she's sort of been trying to figure this out. So while she is physically real-time standing in the midst of the rubble, we also see how she flashes back to her frustration at trying to figure out the code for this Orly. And we see her doing quadratic equations and, just trying to figure things out more on a scholarly level, on an astrological level, and using math and just everything that she knows about planets and stars and how they align. We get to see Hippolyta get extremely frustrated with trying to figure out. She just cannot figure it out. We see her twist and turn. This is an old-timey mechanical toy. Back in the day, these types of apparatuses were meant to hold little secrets. You would pull a lever or push a switch, and there would be a metal door opening up or an unlocking of a thing. And there is, ticks and whirring, and it's all very, very mechanical, very similar to some of the sounds that we heard in that second episode with the opening and the closing and the moving and the shifting around that was going on in the mansion. The mechanism of a thing. She's pushing and pulling and turning, and she just cannot figure it out. And basically it is, this metal contraption that looks like the sun in the center and the planets whirling around it, and each planet you can move autonomously from the other in one way or another. And she's trying to figure it out. She's frustrated, and she just ends up kind of cursing the daggum thing and pushing it across the room. And then she lays across the bed, and she says out loud, "I'm sorry, I can't figure this out." At this moment, we don't know who Hippolyta is talking to, if she's talking to herself, if she's talking to her father. She's had quite extensive conversation with her living father about the planets, the stars. She's solicited his help in helping her figure out the puzzle that is the Orly. And so who is she saying sorry to? Is she saying sorry to him? Is she saying sorry to George? Is she hoping that if she figures this all out, it would somehow give her some answers about George? And as she lays there and she says that she's sorry and she sort of laments, she looks over at the Orly as it is laying on the floor on its side, and she takes a deep breath, and it comes to her. It comes to her what may be the answer. And so we see her pull up the Orly and begin working this plan. Now, meanwhile, This is a reflection back to prior to them leaving the museum. Fast forward, or come present day, and we get to see Hippolyta standing once again in the rubble, and we hear Diana crying out, "Mama, Mama," from the car. "I don't think we're supposed to be here. How is this going to help with Dad's death?" And Hippolyta's not sure. She just knows the answer is here somewhere. And we see where she finds, in the midst of rubble, the cover to the travel guide comic that Diana had given George before he left off on the trip with Lettie and with Tick. It is the cover. So she knows he was here in this place, because how else could have Diana's book have gotten to this place? And just as she realizes that she's onto something, we flash back into the flashback, and she turns two planets sort of opposite each other on their axis on this apparatus, and we hear the whirring. And what is the sun opens up. And when it opens up, it has a keyhole, and there is a key in that hole, right? The hole is a different shape from the key shape that we're seeing. It plays right into the symbols that we are familiar with now that we are 7 episodes in. And there is some inscription around the hole, but she looks at the key and instinctually pulls it out and looks at it. And then we see where the episode opens we see where the episode opens. Now, we don't know quite yet how Hippolyta is going to play into the season's entirety. We just know that Hippolyta does have a pivotal role. We do get to flash back quickly to Christina and Ruby. And Ruby has just discovered where she in our next scene, we get to see Christina and Ruby, and they are in the basement. Finally, Ruby gets to learn what is going on in the basement. Christina has a robe on, and she is still bloody, and they are both standing before 2 hospital beds. One hospital bed has the long since dead body of the original William, and next to him on a hospital bed, and identically with an IV pumping blood from the corpse's body, is the woman that plays White Ruby, the woman that Black Ruby embodies when she takes the potion. So 2 bodies here. And Ruby does seem a bit aghast, although we don't know what it is that Ruby is aghast about. Christina does explain that William was killed by the lodge members that are run by the police. These lodge members that are operating as the police here in Ruby's town. And that Ruby wants to know, all of this has been to avenge his death, your boyfriend's death. And Christina tells her the story. The fact that she was born a woman child to her father, the leader of the sons of Adam, and how he refused to show her anything or teach her anything because she was a woman. So she's decided to infiltrate the sons of Adam through William and court him in the hopes that he would teach her more magic. And what he taught her definitely pushed her into this place where she thought, if I just let go this idea of learning all about the sons of Adam and focus more of my attention on magic, I could be so much more than just a woman who is a part of the sons of Adam, or who knows all the things of the sons of Adam. And Ruby says, including you know, screwing with me. And I think to myself, Ruby, where is your mindset here? Here we have another episode where we're learning things about you that is not necessarily favorable. I've withheld talking about it, but this episode, this scene, is a good example of why I have a bit of trepidation about Ruby. Ruby has a selfish disposition. A lot of it is because she was denied. A lot of it is because of how she was denied, you know, by her mother, or by society, because she is a darker skinned woman, because she maybe is a heavier set woman, because she is Black, period. You know, economically she has been denied. So she has a lot of reasons why she would be bitter, but there is a foundational way about Ruby that is just, for me, kind of selfish. She is slightly aghast that there are two bodies here. She seems a lot more upset with the fact that William is not attainable, that she can only attain William if he is embodied through Christina. She seems a lot more upset with the fact that Christina is withholding things from her, that the whole truth is not out there. It has not been told to her. And she tells Christina, after Christina continues to tell her that with that potion and with what William taught her, she realizes it could be so much more than just being a William, than just screwing a woman. It is about doing some seriously powerful things as it pertains to the sons of Adam. Yes, it is in regards to the book. It is the book of names. It is also in regards to her family and Christina's family, and how that is going to play out in this ultimate plan that Christina has. Christina is still sort of coming across as though she's doing all of this to help for some sort of greater good. And Ruby just tells her in this moment, she insists that she be told everything, no more secrets. So Ruby, to a certain extent, she once again is not running screaming from the room. She's not just so abhorred about the fact that there's two dead bodies here that are just being kept alive for the blood, the same blood that they're using in this potion to cause this pseudo metamorphosis that turns them into this ideal individual that can matriculate and operate amongst the others of society and make things happen. Ruby seems to be bought into all of that, and everything that comes with it, everything that she must do in order to make this happen, to wear this pseudo body and operate in this pseudo way. She's okay with that going on. She's 100% okay with that. At the same time, she is showing us once again that she does not know how to broaden her horizons. At least that's how she's coming across in this episode, and in her episode, in episode 5. That was mostly Ruby's episode, and Ruby showed us that, you know, her sky's the limit uninterrupted viewpoint is just from, you know, working at the department store, being a manager. She could not allow herself to see beyond that. Maybe because she's never seen it, maybe because she's never dared to dream in that way. But Christina once again reiterates that it can be so much more than this tangible that you're seeing here. The fact that you may have found a man who's a white man who, you know, is using magic to help you out, to look out for you, to hook you up. What could this mean for you in terms of your family, in terms of your community? How can you help in that way? You know, it doesn't seem like it's coming to Ruby. So this was a good episode. I mean, this was a good scene with Christina and with Ruby, and it told us a lot about where they both stand in the whole grand scheme of things. This next scene is quite powerful. We get to see Hannah, who is Tick's great grandmother, cousin, running once again out of the burning mansion. We saw Hannah for the first time when she stood in the arch during Tick's ceremony at the mansion before it crumbled around them. We saw how he chased her out. We saw him have a dream in two episodes ago, where he was once again chasing her, but this time he was being consumed by fire. And I've mentioned several times about how Hannah, when she gets to the doorway of the mansion and all is burning around them, she has an individual that she seems as though she's leading out, but to the individual it seems as though they are chasing her. She gets to the doorway, she turns around, and we can see that she is substantially pregnant, and she also has a book under her arm. I've mentioned it several times, but here is the first time we get to see our characters mention this book and this inside of this dream. So Lettie is dreaming, and we see Hannah run out of down this hallway, this burning hallway, and get to this doorway and turn and stand as she has done several times in this dream before. But this time, instead of Tick chasing behind her, we see that it is Lettie. And Lettie is running up, and she gets to a point where she sort of stops and looks at Hannah in the doorway and the pregnancy and the book, and then looks down at her own belly, and she begins to hold it. And this is when Lettie wakes up from the dream. And she's rubbing her own belly, and there's this moment where she seems to just know something. Like it's down, as my mother would say, down in your knower. You just know, And she gets up and she walks into the great room, and there sits Tick looking out the window at everyone bustling down below. And she asks him, has he been up all night? And he says yes. And she walks up to him, and immediately when he turns to her out of his reflection, he grabs her. He's sitting down and she's standing up. He grabs her close to him, and he is right in her bosom. And then he takes this breath, and he comes out of this soft cradle of her body and goes full on, both arms around her waist, and pull her that much tighter to him. That much tighter. He nuzzles down into her, almost like he's absorbing a bit of energy. And in the same moment that it takes her to acknowledge that this is not, to herself, that this is not your standard hug, he snaps out of it. He gets that little bit of charge and begins to look over the papers that he's been stewing over all night and trying to sort of figure it out. And he laments at the fact that several people have tried before him to figure the spells out, to figure these writings out, to just figure out what is being said, what the instructions are, and they've all failed. And she sits on the table next to him, a little thrown off that he came right out of this really endearing hug, but she rallies herself and she encourages him, and she says, but not you. You're going to have this figured out. You're going to get this figured out. And she begins to talk about her dream, and she's talking about it just in a way to support him. You're going to figure it out just like Hannah figured it out. And she talks about how Hannah had the book, and he says, what book? First, she mentions how Hannah, being pregnant, she runs out the front door and grabs this book, and she runs out the front door. And Tick wants to know, how do you know she ran out the front door? And she says, well, I don't really. I'm not sure. I just think about how her being pregnant and a house burning down around her. And the first thing she does, Hannah, is grab this book and run for the door. And Tick says, what book? And she says, believe it or not, I think I had a dream about Hannah this morning. I believe she came to me in a dream. And Tick says, what was there fire? Was it fire all around you? And she says, yes. And Tick, they're looking at each other like, what the heck, right? And he wants to know why they've had the same dream. How is it possible that they've had the same dream? And she tells him once again about how she was chasing her and Hannah got to the door, the pregnancy, the book. And just as she's about to tell him this, say this moment that she realized something was going on with her internally, she thinks better of it and she sort of just plays it off. They talk about how they possibly could have this same dream, and they realize that this book is the book of names. Hannah took the book of names while Christina is looking for the pages. They possibly could stumble upon the entire book, and Lettie wants to know how, was there magic in your family? Was it passed down? He says, well, I don't really know a lot about my family, especially as it pertains to magic. There's a lot I still don't know. And they simultaneously agree that Hannah is trying to tell them something, that Hannah is trying to show them something. But what, we are not sure of. This is a pivotal moment because it sort of connects Lettie and Tick that much further. It begins to really knit their relationship together. Remember Christina's conversation about it being also about her family, but also about Ruby's family. Now, Ruby is not related to Tick. Tick's family has a measure of magic, but how does Ruby's family and in turn, i.e., Lettie, play into that as well? This all begins to seem very orchestrated, like it was all in the stars, if you will. Our next scene opens in Montrose's apartment when it is daylight and it is clean and it is not full of drunken bitterness. The apartment looks like a very nice place, and we get to see Sammy making breakfast. Montrose, for the first time this entire season, looks well. It has to be a bit of time after the event that he and Sammy went to, as well as after he had been attacked by Tick for what he did to Yahima. And Montrose looks happy. He looks healthy. He's still drinking, but it doesn't seem as though he's been up and at it all night long like we've seen him prior. He doesn't look like he's been rolled hard and hung up wet for the first time this entire season. Sammy is going on and on about making breakfast, and he figured since that was the first time that he got an opportunity to stay over, he decided he would make breakfast. And Montrose, in true Montrose fashion, although it is soft and it's done sort of in jest, says, no, this is the first time I let you stay over and you decide you make a big production of it. And Sammy sort of concedes to that. This is the normal sourpuss Montrose that we know and love. But, obviously whatever that he and Montrose have been doing all of this time since the event, Montrose's eye is completely healed. I'm sure Sammy has a lot to do with that. So yeah, go ahead and have your way, Montrose. Be that sour, bitter voice. But we all know that you like being loved and taken care of. And we all know I'm the reason why you look better and you feel better and you sound better, sir. So he starts talking, Sammy does, about how when he went out earlier to get some food for breakfast, he met this woman who had some African scarves and that she'd gotten from Marshall Fields. And I don't know when if I've ever seen a colored person go into that store. And the whole time Montrose's face is getting just a little bit more twisted. We already know something's afoot. Sammy can feel the temperature in the room drop a bit. And as he looks at Montrose and he notices this, he says, that was at the bus stop that I talked to her. No one saw me come or go out of here, because Montrose says that was my neighbor, Beatrice. No one saw me. No one saw me, Montrose. Let's just have a good breakfast, basically. And so he sets the table with the food, puts the plates down, and Montrose sits down after he puts a record on and takes a swig of liquor for breakfast. He sits down and he goes in on the food, the actual breakfast, that it's pork. They didn't have any beef sausage down there at that market. You know, I don't eat pork. Sammy was like, when was the last time? Since when have you not eaten pork? And these grits are runny. I like my grits firm. And Sammy just tells him, before you go into this whole thing where you ruin this happy moment, where you try to remind me that this isn't a real thing, that what we have isn't something real and true that makes us both happy. And Montrose loses it. Montrose loses it. He gets ugly and he gets nasty and causes Sammy to get up, gather his things, and leave, so to speak. Now, Montrose is right on his heels, and just as he opens the door and goes out and turns to go down the hall to get the heck on, he don't have time for all this. I done made your wounds, I done made your bed, I done made your breakfast, okay? And this how you treat me? And Montrose grabs his arm just as he gets out the door and says, wait, I'm sorry. At the same time, we get to see Tick and Lettie walking up the hall. And so they see this moment of intimacy between Montrose and Sammy. And Tick says, so it is true. You are a maggot, but with an F. Very derogatory statement immediately. Okay. In this moment, we see where Sammy knows this is not a conversation that he needs to be a part of. So he walks out between Montrose and Tick and Lettie and goes on down the hall and goes on about his business. He knows by the look on his face that this is going to be bad. This is going to be something. This is going to be a challenge. It's unfortunate that this has happened, but Tick knows now. It's that moment that Tick uses the slur, and Montrose immediately goes to pull his shirt off, and as if he has not already been mollywopped by Tick. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That name, him calling Montrose this slur, it is like Montrose's dad calling him the slur all over again. It's like what he's been called all his life, and he takes that shirt off and throws it down on the ground and demands, say it again, say it to my face, don't you ever call me another name. He's got to fight. He feels like this, every time I hear this word, I got to fight against it. Even if it's my own son, I got to fight against it. And Tick sort of looks over it because he knows he can best Montrose. Out of his anger, out of his hurt, out of his confusion, he says, did mama know? And Tick's got tears in his eyes, and he is still kind of, just fighting back that anger that can be so all consuming. And it sort of stuns Montrose into this place where we're talking about this. We not just gonna fight about this and I'm gonna go my way and you gonna go your way. No, I want to know some real meaty truths to the matter. Did mama know? And he says yes. And Tick turns and he runs off in the midst of his pain and his confusion and, yes, anger. And Montrose looks at Lettie and says, why did y'all come here? And it's at this moment that I can see it from both sides. The pain that Tick feels from never having known his father to show anything real love. And it looks like when you do show love and affection, it's towards another man that is not me. I don't know that Tick is looking at it solely from a sexual standpoint, but from maybe a standpoint where he's showing others this love and affection, or this semblance of love and affection, and I don't receive any of it. I haven't received any of it. And also I think he's upset with the fact that it is sexual. We're talking about 1950s Jim Crow. Although everyone seems to be copacetic with magic and animals, this seems to be something that is an issue for Tick anyways with his father. And we also see where his father has been thrusted into this place where Tick is learning, the truth about who his dad is in these in your face, down your throat, dropped out of midair kind of circumstances that keep popping up. And it's a lot for Montrose. It's a lot for him to process, let alone be able to explain it or to even come close to making Tick feel okay with everything that he is and everything that he's going through. Montrose just does not have the tools. And outside of Lettie, I don't know that Tick does either. Tick goes down the fire escape and into the alleyway behind his father's apartment, and Lettie is on his heels the whole while that he is going down the fire escape steps to the ground. He's blowing out. He's blowing out that energy. He's blowing out that anger. And when he gets down there, there's a table or something there, and he kicks it over and puts the anger into that. And he's pacing back and forth, and he's blowing, filling his cheeks up with air and blowing it out. And pacing. Lettie is right behind him. She comes down and she stands there for a moment. She knows not to touch him. She knows not to go into this conversation about his father. Not now, not right in this moment. But she sort of turns the conversation and says that she asked Montrose how he knew about the family and about the magic, and how he learned, a little bit more about Tick's mom's family. And he says that he tracked a cousin of Tick's mom down, and she says, we can get the Woody and we can go and we can talk to her, okay? And he shakes his head, yes. But what's going on with Montrose in terms of his sexuality is at the very top of Tick's throat. All he can muster out is a yes regarding going down and seeing his mom's cousin, because what is stuck in his craw and what comes out after that are these feelings that he feels about Montrose. And he talks about how Montrose used to beat him all the time and say that he had to beat him that way because he didn't want him to be soft. He was trying to keep him from being soft, and all the while, it makes perfect sense when you look at it from Tick's perspective as a heterosexual male that was abused by his paternal figure. And then to come and discover that this paternal figure has what a lot of people in that day and time consider to be this weakness, this softness of laying with another male. That is a role that was traditionally to be done only by females. And so, Tick is working this out, and he's coming from this perspective that you beat me to keep me from making me soft, and all the while it was all about you not coming across as soft, you not showing that you had this softer side, or that you had this effeminate side, or I can understand the confusion. I can understand the scrabble, and I can respect the fact that Tick took this moment to say these feelings. These feelings were real for him, and he needed to say them. He needed to say them out loud and have them received in this way where he could continue to talk about his feelings about his father, about how his dad must have felt. This is how we come full circle with sort of reconciling what we consider to be the shortcomings of our parents or our siblings or our friends or our spouses, is you've got to say this thing. You've got to speak it. Your dad treated you like his dad treated him. We don't know the back history of your grandfather, but we do know a little back history about your father. And that is that what was done to him, what he learned as a coping mechanism for what may be perceived as a softness, as a kindness, beat out of him. He tried to beat it out of you. And this is why. This is why. It was harsh. It was horrible. But this is why. Hippolyta is back at home and headed out again. She's headed out to take everything that she knows, everything that she has learned from this Orly and from this trip to the crumbled mansion, and she is off to find out what is going on with George and what is going on with this Orly. Now, she doesn't say this. She says she's going on a guide trip, and Diana is very sullen and salty and upset that she is not going with her mother. And Ruby has left Christina's. She's decided to take a couple of days away, and she's going to stay there at Hippolyta and George's house and see after Ruby while Hippolyta is gone. Hippolyta wants to go over the checklist, but Diana, she's surly teen. And she says, oh, it's just stupid. I don't want to go over it. Obviously, this moment reminds her of the last time she saw her father and going over the checklist. And now your only living parent is going out again and leaving you behind. And she has no idea if she's going to see her mother again. And so instead of being this super emotional kid about it, she decides to be this super tough kid and speak harshly and angry at her mother in a way to protect, in an attempt to protect her heart from this fear that she feels. And Ruby says, no problem. I will take care of her and have her invite some friends over, play some games, just take her mind off of everything. Hippolyta knows what's going on with Diana. And so she loads up, and as she loads up, we see where Tick and Lettie are walking up on the Woody, and Hippolyta is already inside. And Tick leans down into the car window and says, hi, Aunt Hippolyta, you headed somewhere? And she says, well, obviously I'm headed on a guide trip. And he says, well, we were hoping, Lettie and I, that we could use the Woody. And she says, well, obviously not. And he takes a deep breath in trying to convince her, to get out of this car and unpack it and let him take it. Like, she says, he says, well, I don't think we just published the new traveler's guide, black people's guide to travel, and I don't think that Uncle George would want you going back out this soon. And she says, well, did I ask you, did Uncle George, when he was getting shot by that sheriff, put you in charge of the guide trip, of the guidebook, or me? And he says, well, no. And she says, well, obviously I don't need your permission then. And she tells him to step back from the car and throws it in reverse and peels off. And so in this moment, Lettie and Tick both realize if they're going to get where they're going, they've got to get on a bus. And he says, well, we've just got enough time to pack our things and to leave. Now, when Lettie walks up, Ruby just looks at her, backs up, and goes on into the house. And so Lettie is thinking about that through this whole conversation that Hippolyta and Tick is having. And so he notices and when he looks on her face, he notices that she's contemplating not going. And he says, well, I can go if you want to stay here and you want to talk to your sister for a bit and work things out. Lettie heads upstairs, and Ruby is sitting in the window looking pretty as a picture. She's a fine built woman. She's sitting in the windowsill with her shades on, catching a little bit sun, barefooted. And Lettie walks into the room and sits down. And it's been some time since Ruby has been at the boarding house. In fact, she's moved out. And Lettie asks her where she's been staying since she left. And Ruby says, exactly how long after you noticed that I was gone before you started to care? And basically, did you even know that I was gone? Listen, they've both been through a tremendous amount since this argument that they had regarding their mother's money. And Lettie has been down in the tombs. She has figured out puzzles and equations. She has saved Montrose's life now twice. She has dealt with Yahima and Yahima's death. And likewise, Ruby has been a whole other person out here. She has gone through a whole other transformation of herself. They both have pieces of the puzzle, but because there is this disconnect between the two of them, the pieces are not coming together. So Lettie begins to apologize. She begins to lament as to how the argument that they had before Ruby went her own way was one of the worst arguments they ever had, and that she was solely at fault for that argument. And as hard as she has tried to not be like her mother, as much as she hated her mother for who she is, she sees some semblance in her mother's behavior as well as her own. And she apologizes to Ruby for that. For that, I'm sorry. For that, I'm sorry for not telling you about Mama's money. I wasn't right about that. That wasn't the right thing to do. And I'm truly, truly sorry about it. And it sort of breaks this shell that Ruby has. She wants to talk with her sister. They want to talk with each other, and Lettie's apology just gives them the permission and the opportunity to maybe begin to put things together. It is a good moment. Ruby says, well, I never heard Mama apologize, so maybe you're not as much like her as you think that you are. And we can feel this lightness come in the room. Before there was this heaviness, and this heartfelt apology from Lettie just sort of shined the light on the situation, on their relationship, and on their friendship. It was a very, very good moment. We flashed to Hippolyta driving down the road, and she's listening to an upbeat French song. Let-toi, le fond, let-toi. Hippolyta is singing along. She's quite a multifaceted, multi-layered individual. She's singing along in French as well, and she's looking at a map, and in the corner of the map she's written a little saying for herself, a little reminder, and some dates and some time there. And she's singing along, and there's a motorcycle that pulls up behind her as she's driving down the road. And for a moment we are frightened because we're not sure if it's friend or if it's foe. And we see where the motorcycle pulls up alongside her, and there's this beautiful black woman sitting on a motorcycle, and she has like a captain's hat on, and she's got a beautiful white scarf, and it is whipping in the wind behind her as she breezes down the road. And Hippolyta smiles and laughs when she sees that it's a black woman who is seemingly on her own adventure, much like Hippolyta is in this moment. And Hippolyta says hi, and she laughs. And the woman pulls ahead and goes on down the road around Hippolyta. Hippolyta continues to sing and reaches down in her bag for a little bit of a snack. And she sees where Diana has hid a comic. Even though she was very curt and short and angry when Hippolyta was leaving, she wanted to show her mom this love and this compassion, and that she was with her. That she's angry because she wants to go with her, and that she was hoping that they could go together, that maybe she wanted to protect her mom in some sort of way. But much like with her dad, she could only send this comic book a bit of encouragement, a bit of enlightenment. But we know that Diana is a seer, and Diana, when she writes into this comic book, it's sort of a legend, if you will. It's sort of a foreshadowing of what's to come. She used to give it to George. The last one that she gave to George had a lot of insight into what was coming up for them as a family in the future. I believe that this comic is going to play a role just like that one did. And it brightens Hippolyta's day. It makes her feel a little bit better about how she and Diana left things. And she cascades on down the road on her adventure. At the same time, we see Tick pulling into St. Louis and getting off of the bus in St. Louis. We see where Lettie is at home at Hippolyta's house with Diana and Bobo and another girlfriend of Diana's, and they're playing cards and having a good time, enjoying themselves. The girls are hungry. They're ready to eat something. Lettie goes into the kitchen to see what's keeping Ruby in dinner. She and Ruby get to talking about where Ruby has been, where she's been staying, and Ruby says that she's been over on the south side as Lettie sits in the windowsill. And Lettie says, oh, you've been over there with a white man. You're seeing a white man now. And she says, where's your Mr. Fix-It talking about Tick? Where's he at? Is he paying rent yet? Because he's the only black man I know that ain't got no job. And Lettie lets her know, oh no, Tick's taking care of everything just fine. You know what I'm saying? He got everything adjusted as it should be adjusted. And she's eating a little bit of snacky, popping it in her mouth and looking real satisfied. And so she tells her, well, you better be careful you don't end up with a belly full of Mr. Fix-It, you know, in joke and in jest. And she says, you guys have gotten pretty close. You look like you were on your way somewhere when y'all walked up. Why didn't you go with Tick? And she says, Tick is handling family business in St. Louis. And she says, well, why didn't you go? And she says, I had some family business of my own to take care of. And it's a warm moment between the two of them. She wants Lettie to taste what she's making to see if it needs anything. And as Lettie goes up to the spoonful, she gives it a little blow and takes a deep sniff. And it turns her stomach. And she steps back off of it abhorrently. And she says, what's in that? Garlic? And Ruby says, what is wrong with you? You love garlic. And Lettie says, I don't know. I'm not sure. She goes to the corner of the refrigerator and she puts her head down a little bit on her elbow and rubs her belly. She says, I've developed some types of allergies or something here lately. And she goes into the room and she throws open Hippolyta's window in the bedroom and takes a giant breath of fresh air. And she hears the whir of the oily and sees its fantastic glow. Tick is having dinner over at Miss Alberta's house, and he is picking her brain about his cousin Ethel and their relationship and how they met, and learns a little bit more about Miss Alberta and her love affair with her husband. She met him in church, and after he passed away, her good friend and his cousin Ethel became really, really good friends because Ethel's husband passed away, and how they made up in their mind and decided that they weren't going to go into the sweet, sweet night as old birds, but they were going to have some adventure and they were going to do some things. Well, Tick wants to know if Ethel talked about a book that was in the family, the Book of Names. And Miss Alberta is not sure what he's talking about, but Ethel did mention a book. She don't know anything about the Book of Names. She thought it was more about a photo album or a family Bible or something like that. And of course, Tick wants to know if she has the book, and she says, no, baby, all of that was burned up in the fire, burned to smithereens in the massacre. Now, for those of us who have not been following closely, we know that Tick's family came from Oklahoma to Chicago after the Great Massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is one of the reasons why a lot of the people that we see are very scholarly and very learned, because they came from a community full of doctors and lawyers and bankers and scholars. They had their own community, their own society, their own financial system, their own healthcare system. their own transportation system, a thriving metropolis that they had built as Black people on their own sweat and merit. And that was bombed and burned to the ground by white folks, which sent them fleeing, those that survived, into different parts of the United States, Chicago being one of those states. And so this is the massacre that Miss Oberta is speaking of. But she does have some photos if he would like to see. And so she goes and pulls the photo book out, and as Tick is looking at the photos, there is a phone call. She runs to get the phone. Now, who could that be calling at this hour? Tick is looking through the photos, and he notices on one of the women in the photo, on the arm is a birthmark. It alerts something in Tick. And so he goes to the mirror and he opens his shirt and looks at his shoulder in the back through the mirror's reflection and sees the same birthmark on his back. At the same time, we see where Miss Oberta is coming back in with the phone. Baby, the phone is for you. So he gets on the phone and it is Lettie. Lettie tells him that she has found the orderly, that Hippolyta must have taken it from the house. And it looks like she figured the puzzle of the orderly out. And there is some type of inscription there, looks like coordinates, and Tick fills in the blanks. She is following where these coordinates are leading her, where this orderly is leading her, and therefore she may be in danger. We see where Hippolyta has walked out of the wind and the moonlight into what appears to be a observatory. She has come in on the top level, and down below is a type of machinery or mechanism, a pseudo computer, if you will. This is before computers. She comes down the steps and around, and she meets it head on. She's looking at it, and she's sort of taking it all in and making these assumptions about what this machine is. It is the next piece in the equation that she is working out. She's got some coordinates in her head, she's got some numbers in her head, and she's got this key. And so she goes up to the machine and she sees a similar opening that she saw on the orderly, and she puts the key down into it. And then she notices on the other side a sort of calendar or time counter. Now, this is back in the day, so each number is on a flap, and that flap pulls, drops forward as time changes. So again, it's all mechanical. It's all about the mechanism of a thing. And also we see where there is this sort of dial. When she turns it on, it comes on, and then it woo 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 and goes back down dead. And so after she looks at this calendar counter type thing on the side, she then goes and puts in some data that she has in her head, and that does not work. And so she goes to the old fashioned, which is whapping the side of the machine. Kunk, kunk, kunk. On the third whack, it lights up. It is light emitting from the inside of the machine. So you've got all this dark metal mechanical material on the outside, and there's this light beaming from it, coming from the engine of the thing. And it has a series of dials in sort of this pyramid format. If you can think of like your camera lens, that you turn it back and forth and it moves forward and then back. All of these rings, but they all seem to work in conjunction but work separately from themselves. It's actually more like a combination lock, if you will. And so she is turning each one of these layers. It comes to her, the coordinates are not for the keyboard but are for these combination layers. And so she moves each layer. Very, very smart, very, very bright. Before she goes into it, she pulls out her paper and she sits there very thoughtfully, and she does the equation and she works it out. She repeats to herself how she's going to work these calculations out. Mass, rotation, velocity, radius. Mass, rotation, velocity. Boy, I tell you, that brain got to work, and she's like an astronaut, baby. This is a smart woman, huh? She is one smart cookie, and when she gets that combination in her head, that's when she begins to turn the levers according to what she has worked out through her equations. And just as she finishes the last turn on the dial, she can hear individuals coming in. It turns out it's 2 police officers, and they're kind of doing this routine check on this piece of property because the machine is important to them and no one knows how it works. This is a conversation as they're coming in. And so she hears them coming, and she doesn't take the key. She doesn't turn the machine off. She runs around immediately behind the machine and sort of hides underneath the back of it. So they come in and they see that this machine is going, and they are thrown. What is happening? How is this machine going? I thought you said it didn't work. And so the lead cop sends one cop, his buddy, around the side, and he goes around the other side of the machine, and they immediately come upon Hippolyta. Now, can you imagine what went through their head when they see this machine working and they find a black woman, a black person, but more importantly, a black woman there? How did you get this machine working? She's like, oh no, I just got lost and I was just, and they were like, how did you get it working? They recognize immediately this machine is working because of this woman. Can you imagine the shock? Okay, and they hustle her up around the front, and they are, how did you get it? Talk to me, gal. And they're threatening her. At the same time, Tick comes in, and he takes a good 5 or 6 steps down from that top landing, down those steps, and then leaps over the banister, jumps on the ground, and knocks one guy. The person that was still holding on to Hippolyta had a gun on her, that police officer. The other police officer just went to the base of the stairs to see who that was coming through it was Tick, man. And he jumped down there and knocked him out and started wrestling with the cop, knocked the cop that had the gun on Hippolyta, knocked that gun out of her hand and knocked her off to the side, and they were both wrestling with him. At the same time, the machine is just whirring. The layers are whirring back and forth and back and forth. The combination has been set in motion, and now it's all up to the machine. The machine is turning and turning. At the same time, we see this star burst behind Tick, and Tick has this cop behind him, and he's got him both arms around Tick from the back, and he's holding his arms, and Tick is wrestling, and the other cop has gathered himself, and now Hippolyta's got the gun, and she's got the gun pointed at this cop that's kind of charging at her. She is nervous and she is scared, but she realizes she cannot let these police officers take her anywhere. It is a matter of life and death, and Tick knows it too. He sees behind him this starburst of places in time, like it's almost like a rip in time, and with each burst of light, it's a scene from a different place and a different part of time. And he wrestles that guy loose and gathers him up and throws him into the starburst, and the guy screams all the way down to wherever, and at the same time, the other cop begins to chase it towards Hippolyta that much more, and she shoots and she kills him, and he falls on the machine and he's bleeding out, and her and Tick are so shocked, she throws the gun down, and they've gathered themselves together, but they're right in front of the time burst, and they're standing there, they're trying to figure it out. This man is bleeding out, he's gonna die, and this is terrible. What are we gonna do? And the time burst sucks them both in, and we see Hippolyta falling, and she lands on what appears to be a strange planet. It's all gray, and there's this dusty, ashy fog rolling through, except there's this white. It appears to be white because there's so much light. Another thing that light is beaming from, kind of a structure, like a mountainous structure, but it's rounded almost, and it's got large holes in it, and the light is beaming from there, and Hippolyta turns around towards it, and the light grows big and it flashes. And then when it flashes, she sees these 2 large Iron Man-like alien creatures, which just seem to appear walking towards her. And just as she goes to scream, we see Hippolyta wake up. And she's on a table, apparently inside of this alien type lab setup. They've gathered her up and taken her inside the mothership, darling. And she wakes up. She is completely naked. Listen, ingenue. Ellis is a beautiful woman. She is built beautifully. She is stark, raving naked, darling, in an all-white room. It's quite lovely, quite lovely. And she sits up with her regular woman body as if she's sitting on the side of the bed and gathering herself. And she looks down at her wrist and she sees where there's this sort of chip type situation in her arm, and it's glowing like a purple reddish color. She's been marked. She's been tagged. She sees a gray jumpsuit and she puts it on and zips it up and gathers herself. What is this place? Hippolyta is trying to just figure out what is what. And as she stands there in the gray sweatsuit in this completely white room, we see the doors open up to this room, and a woman with a giant afro bob walks up to the doorway. Hippolyta runs and tries to run out of the room and run to this thing to ask questions, and she meets a sort of invisible force field, not the same kind that's created with Christina's magic, but this is different. This has some sort of animatronics type, like nanites almost type feel. When you hit it, it warbles a little, but it's got an electronic type of casting from it. And she wants to know, why am I here? Why are you holding me? And this afro bob black woman walks up, and she's got the body of a robot, of a machine, of like a transformer, almost all black. It's kind of like something out of a Missy Elliott video, if you can just picture the all white, and then these two individuals are the only bit of color in the whole schematic. And there's this large black table, octagon type table in the middle of the room. And the woman, the alien afro bob woman, says it's huge, like a mushroom on top of her head. Says, "You are not a prisoner here," and steps back. And as the doors close, Hippolyta runs up and she's continuing to ask questions, and she's beating on the door and she's screaming, "Let me out, let me out, let me out." And her arms where the chips are have become bloody, and she's dragging blood all down the wall. And she sits down and begins to think about the things that she knows for sure. This is sort of a masturbatory response, going over the numbers, going over what she knows. The knowledge of things and math and science and astronomy is a soothing feeling for her. So she calms herself just by going over and over to herself what it is that she knows, every little bit of it. And she pulls the sleeves off and ties her wrists up, because she is noticing that information from her body is transferring into the very walls of this room. It's all futuristic, and she recites some information that she knows about time and physics and space, and she makes note of something that a famous scientist has said about gravity, and she's realizing that they've adjusted her body a little bit to adjust to gravity, and it's all about this future writings that this scientist had made about things that were going to happen in the future. She's read these things, she's reciting these things, she's putting it all together, because now here in this place it all kind of seems to make sense to her in a strange way. And she goes to this octagon shaped table, and it has a series of octagon shaped tiles on it, and she begins to pry at the side of them and pull them out, all the while reciting to herself that which she knows for sure, that which she knows to be true, to be factual, to be proven, and putting it and knitting it all together. And as she picks the tile up and goes to throw it, it floats off up into the light. And so she continues to recite and to remember, regurgitate, and she pulls up another tile and floats it out. Okay, all the while she does not stop. She does not stop reciting, and she picks up a third one and she pulls it out and floats it out, and then touches it lightly. And as it dances in the air, she looks down and gets what she came for, and that's a piece of metal outside of this table, which turns out to be a giant computer. And she goes to the doorway and she pries the panel off of the door, and there's some wiring, and she turns the wiring and she pulls one loose and the door opens. And just as the door opens, this alien type individual with the afro bob comes in and neutralizes her, just zaps her with this invisible energy, and it's got the same cast of nanites and digital cast. It's on her body. It's almost like an invisible but visible type webbing, and it's got the bottom half of her body locked down so she doesn't thrash about. And the individual alien creature says, "You are not a prisoner here. You are not a prisoner here." And she says, and Hippolyta says, let me go," and she says, you want to go? This is what the alien says. "You can go anywhere you want to go. Where do you want to be? You have but to say it." And Hippolyta says, "I want to be in Paris dancing with Josephine Baker," and whoosh, just like that, she is on stage in Paris in full regalia. All the dancers are there, and she doesn't know any of the moves. She's got a beautiful face full of makeup, lashes, and the prettiest, slickest little bob you ever did see. And there she is with her regular woman body, and she is on the stage in Paris. And Josephine Baker comes down the steps, baby, and glides, and she makes note of Hippolyta on her way down the steps, because it is other colored girls there, darling, but Hippolyta's melanin pops brightest of all, and you can see there is a little bit of attraction in Josephine Baker's eyes when she sees beautiful, regular-bodied Hippolyta standing there looking all like a frightened deer. And the girls are getting on Hippolyta. "You know, don't do your moves. You're making us look ridiculous, stupid idiot." And they push her on off the stage, but not before they go topless, and she is the only one standing there, darling, with her top on, usher her off stage. And they don't give her what for about being a black woman. They don't give her what for about being dark skinned. They give her what for about being an American. Stupid Americans, you can't teach them anything. And Josephine takes pity on Hippolyta, and she walks up to her and she tells her, "You're not in America anymore, darling. You've got to put your good foot on. I was just like you when I came here, fumbling all over every place. Here's the step." And she gives her the step, do 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 do, and Hippolyta is so enamored and charmed by Josephine Baker that she would take a second out to give her even the smallest bit of advice. And she dances on behind Josephine Baker until Josephine Baker gets into her dressing room and slams the door shut in Hippolyta's face. And Hippolyta is not bothered, honey. She is exactly where she wants to be, and she is dancing and practicing her moves. And then we see her in sort of this androgynous party. She's been there for a minute now, mind you. When Hippolyta landed on the planet and when she landed into the alien lab, there were numbers, coordinates playing across the bottom of the screen. And so when we see her flash in this moment, we see the same coordinates flash on the bottom of screen. She's still in this place in time with Josephine Baker, but it is an androgynous party, honey. There's girls dressed like boys, boys dressed like girls, women kissing women, women kissing men, men kissing women, men kissing men. It's a wonderful party. They've got French rolled cigarettes and drinks are being poured, and I dare say, darling, there were probably a little bit of reefer, if you will, reefer floating around there as well. They were sharing cigarettes and pulling and drinking, and up walks Josephine Baker to Hippolyta. Hippolyta, Lady Marmalade is playing in the background, baby. When I tell you Hippolyta is gorgeous. And Josephine Baker walks up to her at the bar, and Josephine says, "I feel like a star." And Hippolyta says, "You are a star." Now, this is after Hippolyta notices that she's in one of her places, one of her moods, one on tonight. And "I feel like a star." "And you are a star," Hippolyta says. And she says, "No, honey, I don't mean like a rock star. I mean like an ancient meteorite. Something that was here before time, darling." I say, "You better say it. You better say it." She said, "Like a star in the galaxy, a little itty bitty sun, if you will. okay, and soon to be extinguished. It had joy, it had regalia, but it had this reality attached to it, soon to be extinguished. And Hippolyta can relate. Hippolyta is in this place, this time continuum, and we think, oh, this is where Hippolyta is going to live. No, this is the same Hippolyta, and she's lamenting on all that she has been. Oh, I'm a star too, burned out. I was in a place where I thought that I was happy, but now being here, I just don't know who I am. Everything I've done to assimilate and to be and to have some semblance of happiness, it turns out I still got a noose on my neck. It's just a different kind of noose. And she's talking about these equations that she did over in the alien lab, how she figured out the whole time continuum thing and the time jump situation. All that speaks to who Hippolyta really is, a scholar, a woman who is about numbers and about science, okay, about figuring out the puzzles. But she has traded all of that in so that she could be a wife and she could be a mother. And she tried to find a place, the way to fit it all in, the scope of who she was into this small little box. And in this moment right now with Josephine Baker, she is regretting it. She is considering it conforming in this way that is just like a noose, but not a rope. Because who she is, the star that she is, the ancient meteorite that she is, has been extinguished for all intents purposes. But here now in this moment, she feels powerful. And honestly, she doesn't like white folks. She want to kill them. Okay. And Josephine, what are you going to do with all this anger? She said, you're one of the few people that even notice when I'm in this way, when I'm in this mood, when I'm of this funk. That says something special about you. Who are you, Hippolyta? She says, I am Hippolyta. Okay. I am Hippolyta. Okay. And she says, I am Hippolyta. And then she tosses her head back and looks up to the ceiling and screams out again, I am Hippolyta. And when she comes to, baby, she is in Wakanda. The coordinates at the bottom of the screen continue to roll. Hippolyta is in the middle of learning the art of war. She is fighting for her life, basically. There is a circle of women, African women soldiers there, and they are learning to fight from their leader. The leader's name, I believe, is Maui. And Hippolyta, instantly when she comes out of time and she is in this moment, she realizes, oh, she's here to learn. She's here to fight. She's here to do something with this anger that she feels. And now she's Hippolyta, George's wife for sure. Okay. But in this moment, she's figuring out her own coordinates as well. She's had to do it there in the alien lab. She has to do it there when she's on stage with Josephine Baker. She has to come to grips with who she is physically and sexually and in an artsy kind of way. She's had to learn the dances and learn the moves and become a part of the lifestyle. She adjusts to the temperature in the room. And here now on this dusty plain of red clay, she is here with her African sisters, and she is learning how to fight right, how to fight and win. And as she jumps up and she goes to swing at this woman with her blade, the woman quickly disarms her and throws the blade to the ground and walks off and turns her back and begins to speak to the crowd. And she speaks to the crowd of women about the colonizer. They've come here to slave us, to make us their cooks and feed their children. But we do not have to go into the dark, dark night. We do not have to be fearful. We've got to fight. She gives this speech, and Hippolyta has come in, and she's got her hair and it's braided down, and she's in full Wakanda garb, if you will, and she's got a little small shield on. This is for training purposes. She gets up and she takes the knife and she swipes up underneath up under Maui's feet, and Maui jumps and then steps on the blade and knocks her back again, and continues to pump the ladies up, continues to pour into Hippolyta as well the art of war and how to fight and how not to go into that sweet, sweet night. And Hippolyta gets up and begins fighting. In the distance, we see a tent and a woman in the tent, and she's sitting with 2 female guards on each side of her, and she's watching this training. All the while, the dial at the bottom of the screen that's showing us where we are in time, it's ticking on the lower numbers. It feels like days, maybe weeks, maybe months are moving along, and as we go along, we see where Hippolyta is fighting. It seems like Hippolyta is getting knocked down and getting back up, and getting knocked down and getting back up, but the days are changing, time is changing. This training is over an extended period of time. Okay, and we see she comes to this place where she's learned, and she's taken all of the teaching of Maui and everything that she says, and she bests Maui, and she gets the knife right up under her chin. And once she realizes she's won, she goes over to the woman sitting under the tent, and this is the first time we get to see this woman up close, regal, the full regalia. A beautiful, beautiful African woman. And the African woman stands up after Hippolyta kneels before her and goes and gets a golden helmet of golden feathers, trailing down the top of the helmet, down the back, and then hanging from the back of the helmet down Hippolyta's back. And she crowns her head with it. We see then Hippolyta standing with her group of African female soldiers, and they're standing, and way in the far off distance we see the colonizer. This is what they have trained for. This is the moment they have trained for. And we see where Hippolyta stands there in a moment of pride. She is now the leader of these women. And we see the colonizers scream out and begin to run towards them. And when I tell you, Hippolyta and her girls laid waste, it was probably 25, 30 of them, of the female African soldiers, and they laid waste to this first cluster of men. In the distance, we see more colonizers, more soldiers. They've only sent their first wave, and Hippolyta takes off of her helmet. She's covered in blood. I mean, they laid waste to this first wave of colonizers, chopped them all to bits, cut their heads off, slashed their throats. Okay, and Hippolyta begins to speak. Okay, she begins to speak in this moment, in 1950s Jim Crow, and in this moment in time, and in 2020 present day, where she talks about what to do with that rage, what to do with that anger, how to reconcile with it. You are free. Recognize that you are free to hate. You are entitled to hate too. You are free to destroy if you must, to hate if you must. That is truly love, to be free, to be yourself. You too are entitled to hate and to bitterness and to fight and to scrap and to destroy and to save and to battle for that which is your own, inside of yourself and outside of yourself. You too are free to have these feelings, to have these emotions, and then act upon them. If you must fight, you should feel free to fight. And in this moment, she stands and she says, instead of saying, I am Hippolyta, she says, I am George's wife. And all the while we see the colonizer running towards her, getting closer. And it pans out to this small group of soldiers. And we see the scope of what this small group of soldiers is up against next. It's not about them winning. It's not about this being this happy ending in this moment. It's about the fact that you fight no matter the obstacle. You scrap for it no matter the challenge. You make sure that you do what you can to survive and to show them, if you're gonna come at me, you're gonna know you've been in a fight. And the moment she says, I am George's wife, we see a whoosh in time, and Hippolyta is sucked back into the time continuum where she is time and becomes time and is of time, and she wakes up and she is in the bed in her happy place once again, just like in episode 1, in the bed with George. She is once again in another happy place of hers, and that is as George's wife. Hippolyta is waking up next to George, and she sends him the query that she sent him every morning. What are you looking at, George Freeman? Even though he lies behind her and his arm is around her and she is facing us, she knows just by his movement, his breathing, that he is awake and that he is in fact looking at her. And there is this moment of love and warmth. This is her first time seeing George and being with him since he left that fateful day with Tick and with Lettie. And in the next moment, we see where she has explained everything that she has been through, the White Room and the African village and Paris and all of this stuff. And she's saying it's not time. At first, she thought it was a time machine, but it's not the time. These are many worlds. It was something that she had read about. Remember, I shared with you, George, the story, this article that I read about many worlds, and I had dreamed that it was true, but I had no idea that it is actually true. And George is taking it all in. He does seem a bit confused, but still supportive. George, he seems as though he loves to hear her talk, and he says, wow, all of that, and you still chose to be George's wife, my wife. All of these worlds are a manifestation of her wants and her needs, and one of those things was to see him again, to be with him again, to once again be George's wife. And she sort of gets a little upset, just slightly, just dry, just as though speaking of which sort of came up in her spirit. And she talks about how, she had always wanted to do this thing. She'd always wanted to do the math, the science, the discovering, the astrology, but somehow she just started shrinking. And when she met him, she married him because, I'm sure, because she loved him, but also because he was one that was listening to her. He would support her in terms of hearing her out and not pooing her, letting her talk, because he's a scholar too. He is learning too. They were both iron and they sharpened each other in that way. But nonetheless, she says she shrank that much more because she was conforming to what he wanted to do and who he really is, those things that interest him. And he says, well, why didn't you tell me any of this? She says, I did. I tried to tell you, but he kept protesting. I had no idea. I did not know. I would never have. And then it comes to him. Maybe a conversation, maybe a gesture, maybe a forgotten argument that she did try to tell him something, that she was trying to make something clear to him. And then he apologizes. He apologizes to her. Now they are in the bedroom in their regular everyday clothes and they've just woken up and they're having this intimate moment, and he slides out of the bed and he tells her that he sees her. I see you, Hippolyta. I see you now. I see you now, Hippolyta Freeman, he says. And I want you to be as big as you want to be. And she says, I am Hippolyta, discoverer. And then the next scene, we see a spaceship, if you will, and out walks Hippolyta, and she's in a beautiful space jumpsuit, silver. She's got blue hair and she's got a bubble helmet over her head to help her breathe. And George is right behind her, and he's wearing a red and silver jumpsuit, and he's got a cape on, and they are together, and we see these two little fat aliens walk up to her and give her a gift. She's not in a place of fear. She's in a place of complete comfortability. The next scene we see is where she and George are using these little small futuristic computers and taking samples from the foliage around, and just in wonderment to the floating of their bodies and these beautiful, colorful flowers that are growing in this atmosphere. And she is floating, and all the while there is this speech playing. I'm not sure if it's Maya Angelou or if it is James Baldwin, but it's all about I am not a myth. You are the myth. I do exist. If I don't exist, you don't exist. It's a very powerful piece. It is being recited in the background. And then there's all of this wonderment of this other world. And then we see a much gentler figure float in of this Afro bob-headed woman, this alien creature, and she floats in sort of out of space and out of time in front of Hippolyta, and she says, now that you know that who you are, you can be fully integrated into our world here. And Hippolyta says, if I want to, can I go home? And she says, yes, you can go home. We can return you to your earth if that is what you want. But in this moment, she just takes a moment to recognize that she is Hippolyta the discoverer, and she bursts out of that body and becomes this energy, this entity, this ball of potential and light and this potential to be whatever she wants to be, to take whatever form she wants to take. George is not in the picture here. It is just her and this being. And then it comes to her as she tumbles over herself in this ball of stars and energy and light. And she comes back together into this form with this silver jumpsuit and the colorful rings of Saturn wrapped around it. It's very avant-garde. And she says, but what about Diana? What about Diana? She needs me. There's a whoosh, whoosh. And we see falling through time and space again, except now it's Tick. Tick has been spit out of this time burst that they first saw in this observatory room. Tick is spit out into this observatory room. The first thing he looks around, he calls for Hippolyta. At the same time, this time continuing thing just completely closes, and he is in the dark, and he is looking for Hippolyta. Tick is calling out for Aunt Hippolyta, Aunt Hippolyta, Aunt Hippolyta, and we can hear sirens in the distance. He goes over to this machine that started the whole thing, and he begins bamming on it and knocking on it and pushing buttons, anything to get it to shut off, to turn off. And then he stands back from it. It's a tense moment. Stands back and he looks at the Lovecraft Country book, which obviously he travels with everywhere, and he grabs Hippolyta's purse off of the table, and he grabs the key off the table. But the book that Hippolyta was doing her equations in, she was doing it on the pages of Diana Freeman's comic book that she sends out for every trip when they go on a guide trip. He doesn't grab that book. He grabs the purse. He grabs the key, and he gathers himself and he runs up the stairs and he runs out of the observatory. And then the last scene that we see is the leaves, the wind blowing, the sirens getting closer and closer and closer, the arm of the white dead police officer and a pool of blood, and there nestled underneath the arch of his armpit and his torso tucked away is Diana's book with all the notes that Hippolyta has written on it. But Tick did take the key. Let us talk quickly. Cinnamon, where you gonna run to? Oh, Cinnamon. Let us talk quickly, okay, about this episode. Let us talk about the evolution of things. We see when Ruby was given the chance to attain some unattainable goals, the reins on her imagination were somewhat limited, but Hippolyta is given this opportunity to eke something out of space and of time, to take all that she is and all that she knows and make the very best of herself. And she takes every opportunity opportunity through every jump, through every turn of the dial in time to learn something about herself, to reveal something, to rip away at who she thought she was, who she had shrunken down to be. And we see her expand sort of in this way, from a power perspective. And there are times in this episode where we are not sure if Hippolyta has just passed out somewhere and this is all the creativeness of her mind. But for us in this episode, it seems as though Hippolyta is jumping and she is conquering not just the enemies around her with every jump, but the enemies that also have lived inside of her. And now she's in this place of triumph, this place of complete and utter freedom, and she has to make a choice. Do I stay or do I go? Tick is slowly but surely coming to this place where we know now that Tick has some knowledge of the supernatural. We know that now that he is a believer, but we're still seeing Tick operate in this way where he does not realize that there are a lot of moving parts and he is not the only savior on this team. Hippolyta plays a role. Ruby plays a role. When Lettie called over to Tick, when he was at Miss Alberta's, and she was telling him about the Orly and how Hippolyta had figured it all out, guess who was listening at the door? It was our good friend Ruby. Ruby heard what she said. What will Ruby do with that information? We do not yet know, but we can discuss it down below, children. What did you guys think of this episode? I know this episode was first branded out here on the YouTube streets as a nonsensical episode. What did it all mean? It's about coming to a place of power within yourself. And it is about how others have these same opportunities, no matter the scale, but they, for whatever reason, don't take those opportunities, or perhaps they will use those opportunities not for good, but maybe perhaps, we don't know yet in the case of Ruby, maybe for evil. And we also see how we can stagnate ourselves. Tick would be much further along, much further ahead of Christina in this whole Book of Names game if he would just bring Aunt Hippolyta in, if he would just take the mask off of thinking that she's just some old housewife from Chicago just making it her way, a widow, a fragile woman. If he could just see the warrior inside of her, the same warrior that is inside of the woman that he loves, Lettie. Okay, if he would arm himself, okay, with the women that are thereabout, if he would truly leave them, okay, he would be much farther ahead of Christina. You guys tell me what you think. You guys put it down below. And until next time, honeybees, mwah, 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 I holla.